Whose first class is this? First class for anyone here? A few. Okay. It'll be my fault that your experience at Tyndale began in a terrible crash and burn, catastrophic train wreck of a beginning, but anyway, you'll get over it. I hope you've found your way around here a little bit. Yeah, do come in. This is English 1013, so if you're in the wrong classroom, you can quietly somehow discreetly exit the door, and that's fine. But most of you, I think you've probably found yourself to the right place. This is Introduction to Literature 1. It's a required course for all majors, at least English is. I suspect, if you're like me, you didn't want to be here in doing English because you didn't enjoy English in high school. I don't know if that's the case with you or not. I always enjoyed reading. I didn't enjoy high school English. They're not the same thing. And when I did English in high school, it was a lot better than it is now because we did better books than high school English does now. What I found, I went to Western for first year. Oh, we call it Western University now anyway. But I did it largely as a throw-in. I did a degree in business. That was how I began. It was a general year, but I planned on going into business, and I threw in English as my 5th course because I didn't know quite what to take. And my father had done English as his bachelor's degree, so I thought I'll take that. And I didn't expect I'd like it, and lo and behold, it was my best course. And it was because of the instructor, but it was more than the instructor. It was because of the material. The material was simply superior to what I had done in high school, and the whole climate of the classroom was very different than high school. It was a bit of a whirlwind tour. It moves quickly, and you'll find that the reading load and the speed with which we expect you to complete works is a lot higher than high school. It's a big shift. So first year university is tough because the requirements go up in every sense, and then you're in a new environment, and if you're living in residence, then you have to manage your own schedule, which is its own problem, and then you get other people's sicknesses, and if you have to share a room, and then you have to eat the residents' food, and on and on and on. It's tough. First year, first semester, very tough. And I genuinely think it is. It's actually a big transition. Some of you moving away from home for the first time. But the courses hopefully will make it worth it. And I think that they will. The material we do on this course is so good that the material has been read for millennia in the case of the stuff at the beginning. That's thousands of years. Alongside the Bible, they would be the best read works of literature you would find pretty much anywhere. And yet if you're like me, you will never have heard of them. Maybe you have, but I hadn't. I had not heard of Homer. The first poet that we're going to look at, Homer. Homer Simpson did not yet exist. But Homer I had not heard of, nor did I heard of Virgil and so forth. And Dante, I think I read about Dante in the Hardy Boys. They mentioned Dante's Inferno, and I had no idea what that meant. The author referred to Dante's Inferno as if I should know it, and yet I didn't know it because I'd never read it. And it wasn't mentioned in high school. The curriculum of our high schools, when I took it, was comparatively good to what it is now. Nowadays, it's mostly very contemporary fiction. Some of which is okay, but I'm going to stick my neck out and say none of it is on par with Homer. And that's not sticking my neck out very far. The characters we'll meet in Homer's Odyssey, which is the first work we're going to look at. I'll just stick it up here. Are recognized throughout cultures and later forms of literature all over the place. You will find in the underworld there are creatures mentioned that you'll find in Harry Potter. the idea of an Odyssey, just the phrase an Odyssey, is taken from this work. Many of the standard tropes of standard stories are taken from Homer, or Homer himself uses them. So it's an archetypal journey. And it's one that is centered on a historic event that is absolutely transformative for all of Western culture, that namely the battle at Troy, between the Trojans on the one hand and the Greeks on the other. A later writer will ask, is this the face that launched 1,000 ships, referring to Helen of Troy? That was written in the 16th century, that little extract that I quoted from there. But he's referring back to this event. It is informative for Greek culture. It's also informative for Roman culture, because the Roman descendants come from Troy. They're the Trojans. They go on and found the city of Rome eventually. They trace their heritage back to this one battle of Troy. The Greeks likewise will see their greatest heroes being referred to in this particular battle. The Odyssey is actually not going to deal with the battle of the Trojan War. It's going to deal with the aftermath. I'll say more about that when we actually look at the book itself. But it's a pivotal event, and it will be referred to by Shakespeare, by the Romantic poets by the 20th century. A Caribbean poet by the name of Derek Walcott writes a poem about 3 Caribbean fishermen. It's called Omeros, tip of the hat to Homer. The name of the protagonists are Achilles, and I can't remember the other 2. But they're 3 fishermen. They're named after figures from this book. It is cited across cultures. It's not a white thing. It is an inheritance that we all have, that most of us, it's like a box that we didn't even know we've been given, let alone opened up. And when you've read the works, they will stick with you. You'll see them mentioned in movies. You'll see them cited in musical scores. Literally everywhere. In painting, if you ever go to a painting gallery, an art gallery, you will see paintings, and they will have figures from this work and others that we'll look at. When you start to do that, a world opens up to you that you didn't know existed. And that's one of the best parts of a liberal arts education, is it gives you an open mind. Liberal in Christian circles tends to be a negative term. It's not the way I mean it. I want you to be liberal-minded, open to a broader and richer world than the one you came into the university with. That's why people go to university. They want to be better than they came out, right? And that does mean exposure to things that you haven't seen. The intention is to make you better, not worse. So liberal for me is going to make you better. Liberal in the pejorative sense means it's going to corrupt you with bad theology and bad ideas. That is far from my intent. And I don't think it'll be the outcome either. But let me go backtrack a little bit. We're going to look at the Odyssey, though, the first month, more or less. And if that sounds like it's fast, and if you see the Odyssey, you'll find that it's a pretty dense book. I would encourage you to start reading it if you can. This is the one that I've recommended by Richmond Lattimore, the translation, Odyssey of Homer. You'll see that it's, well, you can get it used for $11.27. That's pretty inexpensive. I recommend that you get paper books. Yes, sir.
Is it required that we use that
Translation? No, but I think it's the best one, and I will be citing and reading from it, and it will not only contain the translation, but the book number and the line number, and that can be a little challenging sometimes. And you'd be surprised at how different translations can be. Lattimore retains a lot of the verse qualities of the original. It's difficult to do. You find the same issues in translation of Homer that you would in Scripture, except even more difficult in some ways, because in Homer there's a meter to it, and there isn't a meter in Scripture. So do you want to retain some of the poetic qualities, or are you just trying to capture the sense of the thing? That's part of the translator's challenge. So I would recommend it. If you have another one, yeah, by all means use it. But the ones I've recommended are, in my view, the best translations. I have other ones myself, but those are the ones I have to choose one, right? So that's what I'll use in class. But it's not a bad price. And as I say, these are the great works of Western literature. You can go back to these over and over, and they will repay a second and a third and a fourth reading. I can speak from experience there. Class time, you know what it is. Office hours are before this, if you want. My office is, what is the number? Does it even say where it is? It doesn't. That's a little odd of me. I don't even know the room number of my office. It's G, I don't know, 4 something. I'll tell you next time. But my email is there. If you want to meet with me, send me an email, and I'd love to meet up with you. You should take advantage of the fact that you can do that at Tyndale, and it helps. I think it'll help you. I'd love to get to meet you and hear where you're from and what your hopes are for your studies here. Often you can look back 4 years on a conversation that's had in the first few weeks. It's fascinating how that works. But we're going to cover on this course works of literature up to the year 1660. It's that date because next semester we'll look at Paradise Lost by John Milton, which is an epic. And so is Homer's Odyssey. So not only is the story of Homer that begins at the Battle of Troy influential on Greek culture, it's the central event of Greek culture, and Roman culture, the epic form in which he writes it becomes the dominant form for the greatest writers in every language. So you can see some events are so formative that they keep being cited and pulled apart by later writers. You'll find the same thing with the book of Exodus in Scripture, or even the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. Later biblical authors will refer back, even obliquely, but sometimes explicitly, to what happened in the garden. In Luke's gospel, he will give a genealogy for Jesus that goes all the way back to Adam, which is one of the reasons why we have to hold to a historical Adam, by the way, because Scripture does. But even the events there, the reference to sin, original sin, the fall, death, the consequences of sin, those are referred to all over Scripture. The idea that Adam and Eve are to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and give descendants, godly offspring, is again referred to everywhere. The idea of a garden is part of Jesus' parables. Adam and Eve are in a garden. It's not just accidental that the parables are often referring to a garden. It's thinking of an Edenic state, an ideal state. And God is the gardener, by the way, often in the parables. Itself very interesting. Adam and Eve are gardeners. Here, gardening was done wrongly. Adam failed to tend and to keep the garden. God will keep his garden very well. That's how the Bible ends as well, right? The garden in the midst of the city. Adam and Eve, the cultural mandate, they're there to take a garden and make it into a city, to cultivate it, make it into a fruitful place. Literature works the same way, by the way. It builds on foundations. And the foundations, you don't just ignore them. The more you look at the foundation, the more you understand what comes on top of the foundation. So when we revere Homer or revere Moses, what we're really doing is saying that who we are is dependent on who they were and what they said. So these are formative figures, not to be ignored if you really want to have a deep, rich education. So it's not wasted material. You'll find some of it's over your head, but what you do retain will last. And again, if you miss a little bit, you can go back and read it again. I'll let you read over the syllabus. I don't like just going through it that way. But let me talk about the course outline here a little bit. So I made reference to the Odyssey right there, written by Homer, I'll fill in the details next time. We'll take 4 classes to look at it. I would recommend, this is the heaviest reading the whole semester, by the way. It's hundreds of pages. I don't know how many 300, 400. 4 classes. I recommend you start reading it. I give it to you at the beginning because you have no other responsibilities right now. You may feel like you're overwhelmed with new stuff, which you are, new people, whatever. You're here to study and to educate yourselves. Don't get behind on the reading. Do not get behind on the reading. It's really hard to catch up. I speak from experience. I got behind my reading in my first year and I never caught up. I failed my first essay in English literature. That wasn't because I was behind. It was because I did not know how to work. Because I coasted through high school. I was getting, doesn't really have an equivalent right now, but I'm getting 60s. And then I realized I'm not going to get into university with 60s, so in grade 13, which they had at the time, I lifted my grades by 20%. You're not supposed to be able to do that. It's not right. But I needed to get into, I thought, well, what am I going to do? My dad said, if you're not studying, you're going to be out working, and not in my house either. And I was like, okay. So I guess I need to pull up my socks a little bit. So I worked enough to get into the university, but still no work habits at all. Going to bed on time, getting up at the same time, exercise, eating regularly, cultivating good habits, good character habits, they really stand you in good stead. I didn't have any of that. Not that I was awful, but I was just useless. That might be you too. So you're going to have to not only deal with the challenges of the work, you're going to have to deal with the challenge that you are to yourself. You may not be a weed, but you're not actually a very fruitful person either. If you're like me, I'll speak to myself in speaking to you. You know, I wasn't bad, but I wasn't very good either. I was certainly not very useful. So start reading it. If you have it already, pick it up and get reading it. If you find it challenging at all, you might want to read it out loud. It was meant to be read out loud, and it works better when you read it out loud. You'll find it easier to follow, especially if you're sitting in your chair and you're sort of dozing, as you're tempted to do, and you've got you're finding a cozy place to sit down with. Try reading it out loud. You can try walking around and reading it out loud. Then you're doing a couple of things that are really interesting. Employing faculties that you don't when you read silently. You're employing your tongue, which makes a sound, and then it's your ear, and then you're also doing the reading. So you're using a threefold method of helping the sense of the text get into your head. It really does make a difference. Reading silently is very difficult. We're taught to read quietly and so forth, so we just get used to it, but it doesn't work very well. If you want to remember anything, read it out loud. It really will help. And it will mean that, by the way, you can't read out loud as quickly as you can reading silently, but that's because by reading silently, you're actually just sort of skipping. And you get to the bottom of the page and think, well, hold on, what did I just read there? If you read out loud, it will be more slow, but you will retain it better, and ultimately you'll finish it more quickly with an understanding of what it was. That's where we'll start off. So this is in Greece. Homer is writing probably about 800 BC. I'll talk more about that next time. Then we will move on 400 years to another great work of literature by a man by the name of Sophocles. He was an Athenian dramatist, and he writes a tragedy in Latin called Oedipus Rex. Sometimes we know it by that translation. But Oedipus the king, about a man who unwittingly murders his father and marries his mother. One of the great tragedies of Western literature. an appalling, disgusting tale of incest, murder. But it's a tragedy. When I say it's a tragedy, Aristotle says it's the tragedy. The great tragedy. Tragedy is a form of drama in this period, which the greatest dramatists are writing. This one is the one Aristotle says is the best of all the rest. And it was cited by Sigmund Freud, the Oedipus complex. There's also an Electra complex and so forth. What that tells you, by the way, is that people, psychologists, even before Jordan Peterson, read classical literature. They just took it as a fertile ground to think about things. They saw something universal in these stories. And when I say universal, it seems significant then, and it still does. We're only going to spend 2 classes on that. But you'll love it. It's truly great. Yes, again, please.
Sorry, I realized you actually hadn't got to the part that was not
Okay, which is the essay? Okay. So I'll get to that in 2 seconds. Then we'll move on, and we're still in the Greeks, to Plato's Republic. And in Plato's Republic, we're only going to look at Book 7. In Book 7, we have the philosopher Plato engaging with the poets of his day, who are so influential that Homer is called the teacher of all Greece. Everyone looks to Homer as if it were the Bible, as if he were. He's cited as an authority. There are people called the rhapsodes who make their living by performing Homer in public events, by memory, by the way. So they're not reading it, they have memorized the whole thing and they're performing it. And they're strumming along with it and singing it out at certain points. Plato is critical of Homer and the things that Homer tells. He says that much of it is immoral. And how can Homer be as great as we say he is if he's teaching us that the gods are immoral? I think that Homer knows nothing about the gods. The gods are not immoral, the gods are just. So there's a critique, a philosophical critique, that comes from within the Greeks against the Greeks. This is the birth of modern philosophy or of ancient philosophy in this period. So it's a response to a poetic view of the world. A poetic view so influential, as I say, it resonates down Western history, but within the same community there's a philosophical critique that says this is not right, this is not acceptable. And Book 7 is an allegory, and it's called the Allegory of the Cave, in which he illustrates what philosophy does better than what poetry does. I'll say more about that when the time comes. I have a lot to say about all this stuff, obviously. But then the first essay will be due. Because at that point the Greek era is over and we're going to transition to the Roman period with Virgil. And I can get you an essay out relatively early on in your Tyndale experience. So you get an essay under your belt. And I'll give you topics later on. I'm not going to give you them right away, by the way. So you can ask, but you will not get. And the reason why is I want you to think about the subject matter before you think about my stupid questions. If you have my stupid questions in front of you, you read the text with my stupid questions in mind, and you sort of ignore all the stuff that doesn't suit my stupid questions. And then it skews what you're reading and makes you think that what I'm asking you to do is the most important and all the other stuff you can ignore. And that's not true. I have to ask you some questions, but there's a lot of stuff there that it's not going to be dealt with by my question that's still important. So it prevents you from being twisted in some ways away from the whole experience of the text. I want you to read the text. I'm the professor in the classroom. Homer is your real teacher on this. That's what I'm trying to suggest. Same thing when you read scripture. Don't go to a commentary. Read the original text. Don't look at the study notes. Read the text. By after that, then you can go to a commentary, study notes, whatever, but let the text speak to you first. And you may find that the commentaries often miss the point, and they do. So may I. I don't think so. I think I'm usually on point, but I'm going to leave out a lot of stuff. There's no doubt about that. But I'll give you the essay questions. This, by the way, is just a link to the Republic online, because it's rather than get you to order the whole of the Republic and pay the cost of that. I think it's worth it, but I'm trying to keep your costs down. There is an online resource there. Let me see if I click this, if it actually works. Yeah, there it is. So it's book 7. Okay? You can see it comes in the form of a dialogue. So I didn't require you to buy the Republic. Then there's reading week, so you get the essay done before you go away on reading week, and then you're going to catch up by doing actually reading. Many people will write essays during reading week, but you'll already have done one of mine. So hopefully that will help you. And then I'll try and get them back relatively promptly. I think the essay writing, by the way, is one of the most important things you can do in university. The reading, yes, but also your reflection on it is important. And so take that seriously. I'll give you a couple weeks to reflect on that. Then we'll move on to Virgil and the Roman period. So these 4 weeks, oh my goodness, only 4 weeks to deal with the Latin classical era. Virgil's Aeneid, also an epic, now written by a Roman, also citing the Trojan War, but he's on the other side. He sees the Greeks as the bad guys and the Trojans as the good guys. And the gods are the same in both cases, they just have different names now. Because the Greeks call them one thing, the Romans call them another. But it's the same gods. You'll recognize them after a while. You get used to, when in Homer he writes Athena, in Virgil it's Minerva. Same god, same goddess. Just has a slightly different name. Often the names are the same, by the way, but sometimes they're different. And the Romans are under the influence of a particular god or goddess. The Greeks were under the influence of Athena. She was the main goddess there. The Romans, on the other hand, are under the influence of Juno. And Juno is really angry that Athena has tricked her back here. We'll get into the trickery and the fight amongst the gods. It's one of the reasons that Plato says that Homer can't be right. The gods can't be fighting and deceiving and lying and seducing and murdering and doing all the terrible things that they're said to. This is just nonsense. Gods can't do that. Plato pushes us in the direction of monotheism, in fact. Why that is, some people think that he went to Egypt. Well, he did go to Egypt, and some people think he encountered the Hebrew scriptures from locals there and then brought it back and it changed his philosophy. I think it's a bit of speculation. The early church fathers suggested it, however. So, could be. We'll do a bit of the Aeneid. We're not going to go through it exhaustively. And then we'll move on very briefly to Ovid. And Ovid is writing yet another epic. Now that's number 3. We're only going to look at the beginning, his account of the beginning of things from a pagan point of view. The creation account in Metamorphoses. It's the wrong term, actually. It's not a creation account. It's an account of origins. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to compare it to Genesis 1 and 2. And I want to show you how different a biblical worldview is from the pagan worldview. And the account, when you first read it, you'll think, oh, wow, look at all the similarities. And they are there. But then when we look at the very specific details, we'll say, oh, this is such a different account. We could have looked at a Babylonian creation myth as well, but we'll stick with the Latin. Again, very similar and very different. Modern scholars sometimes say that it's the same account. And they're all looking at it from different vantage points. I beg to disagree. This is wrong. But certain things are similar in all cultures, like an account of the flood, the universal flood. That's pretty much in every culture. which suggests to me that it happened, if there were any doubt. And you can date it then. Anyway, but we'll get to that. But I wanted at that point to conclude the study of the classical era with a text that will talk and allow me to compare it to a biblical worldview. So we'll take the classical worldview and the biblical worldview and look at consequences. So what you're going to find on this course is that as Christians, well, that's how I'm teaching it, we are going to be engaging with pagan texts, and we're going to want to take them on their own terms, try and understand them the way they were written, and at the same time show the consequences of pagan views in how they treat human life and how they regard women and slaves and children and the gods and so forth. We're going to compare it and contrast it, and we'll take a biblical worldview and say, look at the differences here. And when a classical age clashes with the cross and a biblical worldview, what happens to that world? What do the people start to do that are called Christians? What do they do to the world that they inherit? How do they regard women and children and the gods, and how they act in their personal lives? Are they sexually monogamous? Are they willing to indulge in the local cultic sexual rites, which is common throughout the ancient world? They have multiple wives or consorts or whatever. Are their children their own children from birth, or do they get adopted like the Romans do? You have to be adopted by your father, your birth father. He adopts you. When he adopts you, then you become his heir, not till then. So you have no status until you're given legitimacy by dad, which means that if you displease him, you're gone or you're out. Do the same thing with offspring they don't want. They set them on the corner. There's a little corner where they put the unwanted babies, and the dogs come in and the dogs are waiting for the babies to come, because that's where they put the unwanted babies. What do the Christians do? They adopt them. They take them off the streets. Why do they do it? Pagans would never do it. It's not even their members of their family. Why would you do such a thing? Because of Christian views of the sanctity of each and every human life. Male, female, race, irrelevant. It's the same. So big, significant, same period, roughly speaking, Christians in the Roman era, but the consequences of theology are enormous. And you can trace the beginnings of that theology just to the accounts of creation and origins. So if you do a biblical studies class on its own, you would gain a great deal. What you wouldn't gain is the idea of how greatly this view that you're reading in Scripture changed the world in which they lived. Totally turned it upside down. That's what it says in the book of Acts, by the way. Turned it upside down. I think people think it's a figure of speech. They're exaggerating. They are not exaggerating. Then we're going to skip, and this is sort of embarrassing, we're going to skip 1,300 years to Dante. Italian Renaissance. The rebirth of classical education. So here we looked at the classical period, 1,300 years in which there is a period which sometimes gets called the Dark Ages, at least some of it does. I don't see it as the Dark Ages. It's dark in the sense that there isn't a uniform character to it, and there isn't a dominant political figure in it. But in this period, Christianity starts to plant seeds and to sprout and to germinate, and it preserves classical culture, by the way. It's the monks in the monasteries that preserved the books that were then that led to the revival of the Renaissance. That, and the fact that the Muslims did the same thing with the Eastern Christian empire, they preserved their books as well. The classical books, like Aristotle, were not preserved in the West. They were preserved in the East, because the East was Greek Christendom, and the West was Roman Christendom. They preserved the Greek texts, including much of Plato and Aristotle, unknown in Rome. Then when the Muslims came and were brought into conflict with the Western world. They brought texts with them from figures that they revered as well. The Muslims were regarded as highly educated and learned because they had this classical inheritance that had been lost in the West. Well, when they brought it brought about a renaissance in Italy. And I'll deal with that when we come to it. But painting and sculpture and architecture and literature, music, all a huge transformation. Dante writes in the middle of the Middle Ages, in the Christian era, shortly after the founding of the university, which is a Christian institution, by the way, did not exist in the ancient world. Plato had his academy, Aristotle his lyceum. Neither of them had a university. I'll talk about why that is and what the significance of that is. You're at a university now, at a time when there are very few universities around anymore. They call themselves universities, but they aren't. But I'll dig down into that when we get to that period. Yes, question?
Yeah, is Dante's Inferno considered like a poem?
It is a poem.
Oh, okay.
And so is the Purgatorio and the Paradiso. It's one poem. It's called the Divine Comedy by someone else. He just calls it La Commedia. The comedy, you'd say, when you come to read it, you'll wonder why it's called the comedy. I'll deal with that at the time as well. It's not particularly funny. That's why you'll wonder, think, what does this have to do with it? No, I won't give it away. But we will come to look at that. Dante, by the way, is going to talk about, in the Inferno, he's going to talk about hell. In Purgatorio, he's going to talk about this place between heaven and hell. And then in Paradiso, he'll talk about heaven. The view of everything that is under the earth, on the earth, and above the earth. It's characteristic of an epic. We'll see that next time when we look at Homer. And epics are encyclopedic. They teach us about all things. And that's why Homer's the teacher of all Greece, because he tells us everything about everything. You want to know what happens after death? Homer's going to tell you. So we'll look at Dante, and then we're going to backtrack a little bit. I wanted to do Homer, I wanted to do Dante on the back of Virgil, because Virgil is a direct influence on Dante. So we'll go there, and then chronologically we'll take a step back and look at an Anglo-Saxon epic. It's back 500 years before that, but I wanted to keep the continuity there. I break the chronology for once. Yes, question again.
I think that was my question you just answered.
I did, okay.
My question is about the piece of Virgil.
Sorry, just a little louder?
You just answered my question saying that you wanted to compare Virgil.
Yeah, okay, why they're out of order, yeah. Yeah.
And then my question was, why was there a piece of Virgil on October 30th?
Oh, because in Virgil's fourth eclogue, which I'm citing here, and I'm going to give a link to it, we have the reason why he's so influential to Dante. And the reason he's so influential to Dante is because he's so influential to Western Christendom. People read Virgil as a textbook, a manual on how to write good Latin. But it's not only because of his style, it's because in the fourth eclogue he gives a messianic vision of the future, which sounds a lot like Isaiah, the lion lying down with the lamb and so forth, like a period when what we would call the consequences of the fall are undone. And he was regarded as a prophet who didn't see what he showed others. And then actually in Dante's, I think it is in the Purgatorio, he's actually described as a man who had a lamp behind his back that allowed others to see, but he didn't see it himself. He led others to Christ through his vision, which he himself didn't understand. Interesting. That's how he was received, based on this little extract from Virgil's eclogue. And now Virgil is the guy who leads Dante through his whole Divine Comedy. So So when I say that texts influence other texts, so do authors. I mean, it's that strongly connected. It's not just that they're reading it, it changes the way they look at the world. Good literature will change the way you look at the world. One of the things in our age is a lack of a sense of coherence, purpose, and meaning. One of the reasons why we have that is that we don't have core texts that bind us together. Everybody's their own special snowflake. Right? We're all unique. If everybody's unique, nobody's unique. Uniqueness doesn't mean anything. If everybody's unique, then we're all the same. And at the same time, unimportant. What's it like to be an individual for whom individuality means nothing? Except distress and anxiety and a sense of chaos, purposelessness, futility, no hope. It used to be the case that university students were full of hope when they came to university. Now it's not so. People feel defeated and depressed, anxious, without any sense of purpose in their lives. I think we will address those things implicitly in the class. As I say, I'm happy to talk to you outside the class as well, but I think these texts actually give a sense of structure and coherence and meaning. And what we'll find is that Christians engage with the culture around them, and the culture is so the pagan epic is transformed by Mr. Dante, totally transformed. He will make it a Christian epic. And Milton, who we'll start with next semester, even more so. He begins in the Garden of Eden. That's where he begins his epic. He's still writing an epic. And he's still going to tip his hat to Homer and Virgil, more to Virgil even. But he's going to say their vision, what did they know? They were blind. These men didn't see the glory of God, but we have, because it's been revealed to us. And so we're going to take their vision. I'm still going to write an epic, because epics tell us everything about everything, and that's what the Word of God does. And I'm going to focus it more on that. And say once you start to put the pieces together, it starts to give a structure, and you will find that you are united with the people that went before you, your parents and their parents and generations past. The Apostle Paul would have read the great Greek authors. He certainly read the great Roman authors, as well as the Jewish ones. Augustine would have read them, the great theologian of the 4th century, and loved them, while at the same time deploring them. You can have both experiences, by the way. You can think there's something contemptible about it while thinking this is great. Life's a little complicated sometimes. Anyway, we will do to Beowulf, the great Anglo-Saxon epic. We'll see very differences. This is the first work of literature that normally would be considered to be English. It's written in Anglo-Saxon, but still. And we'll notice some differences here about it. And then we will move on to the first work that I actually read in first year English, which is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, part of the Arthurian legend. Sir Gawain is one of the Knights of the Round Table. You'll love this work. It's so good. It's fun. It's not an epic, but it's great. And as I say, you will find it thoroughly entertaining. So the Beowulf is probably written, 800 AD, maybe. Some dispute about that. Sir Gawain is written 600 years later. Yeah, and now it's written in Middle English. You can read the original. If you picked it up, you'd struggle a little bit, but if you read it out loud, you'd pick up most of it. Recognizable. Getting close to Shakespeare's English. So we'll read that, and then we'll read a play, the second play that we will deal with. Only the second. The first was Oedipus the King, a tragedy. The second is Everyman. Everyman is about a man named Everyman. In other words, he doesn't have a name. It's about every man. It's about all of us. So there's an individual who represents everyone. Achilles doesn't represent everyone. Neither does Odysseus. Neither does Aeneas. He doesn't represent everyone. But in a Christian way of looking at things, there's a unity to human personhood that says that the way we experience the world for all of its differences, is fundamentally the same as everyone else because we're all human beings. So every man is, the title is predicated on that idea that human personhood is a universal experience and yet individual. Very important, both of those things. You're an individual. There's no one quite like you. You're unique. But you are also a human being, so everyone is exactly like you. So you should be able to expect when you appeal to justice that they know what you're talking about, because justice is the same for everyone else. Either it's justice or it's not justice. If it is justice, then it's the same. Right? And then you take account of individual circumstances in your adjudication, but there's a universality to justice. Every man is predicated on a Christian worldview. So it's a play in the medieval period. It's at a time when literacy is relatively low. Teaching happens through the stage. This is called a morality play. It teaches people about Christian morals. There are miracle plays taken from, like, usually Noah and other accounts and so forth, but I think you'll like it again. Very good. And then I'm going to come to easier things at the end. When I say easier, shorter is what I mean. In the English Renaissance period, and deep into it. We're in the 17th century here with John Donne and George Herbert. These are poems, lyric poems. So they're what you and I tend to think of as poetry, short, rhyming, that sort of stuff. The poetry you read in high school was terrible. Awful. With apologies to the poets that contributed to the poetry that you read, it's just simply terrible. By comparison, at any rate. You don't have to agree with me. And that's okay, actually, by the way. I can live with that. When you've read this, then you can tell me whether you agree with me. At the moment, it's just me blustering and hopefully not offending too many. But you'll love Donne and Herbert, and as I say, they're shorter at this point. At this point in the semester, you're on fumes because you've been here for a couple, and you're not used to working as hard, and you've read so many things, and you're writing so many essays, and so much is going on, and you're starting to, you can't breathe anymore. And so we'll do short readings, and we'll be able to, bite size. But we'll find that they're hard to digest because it's really substantive stuff. Anyway, I think you'll like it going into the end of the semester. So, and the second essay is due in there as well. But that's the means of assessment. Class participation, yes, showing up, whatever. The essays, and then a final exam. Question?
Question going back to Beowulf.
Yes.
Certain pages that you want us to read for this?
Probably all of it, but did I put pages down? I don't know. There might be a little chunk in the middle that you can avoid. Might be. Have you read Beowulf? Have you heard of it?
Yes.
You have? Oh, because it's a movie, right? Yeah. And there's a couple. Don't watch the movies. Angelina Jolie as the Beowulf's mother, like Grendel's mother, that's just not right. But anyway, it's probably the whole of it. I might be able to take a few hundred words out of the middle. Well, you don't have to. You can read the whole thing. I'm never preventing you from reading. I'm just... there are three. He has Beowulf, the hero, against three monsters. Great stuff. Yes?
What's the second essay about?
So the essays always cover what has happened between. So the first essay will be on Homer or Sophocles. The second essay will deal with everything between that time. So from Virgil to that point. So be a question here or there. Take your pick. Write on one topic. The final exam will be the whole course. We'll cover the whole course from the beginning to the end. It will make sure that you've been doing the reading. So it'll be sort of like those sorts of short answer, basic stuff, not difficult, but still, have you read it? And then writing some essays again. So some of the essays that you write, by the way, will be preparation for the exam. My exams are easy. Says he, I don't have to write them. Any other questions? I saw another hand, but okay, please.
When do you intend on giving us like the outlines for the essay?
Very late. Oh, yes.
What if I want to start this week?
Have you read the Odyssey?
No.
Right. Well, there you go. That's why. That's why. I answered that already. I appreciate the diligence because I never had it. You actually can get ahead and plan, and wow, that's a capacity I never had. Took me a long time. Some people, my wife, say I still don't have that capacity. But if you can, and that's great. But I want you to read it. I meant that seriously. I would like you to read it. Now it's going to put you under a little pressure, but I think this is probably the first essay, so I think you're okay. Shouldn't be swamped by that point. I want people to read the work. The lectures are indispensable, by the way. I am recording this, and I'll record all the classes, and I'll throw them up on my YouTube channel. But it's better to be here in person because you can ask questions, and there's a whole thing about the experience. It's just different and better. But still, if you want, it'll be there, and you can go back and say, oh my goodness, what did he say? And you can scroll back and listen to it in double speed or whatever you want. Yes?
For the readings, like you say book 1 to 4, would that, I haven't read the Odyssey yet, would that be a realistic, or would it be over-realistic or under-realistic of how much an average person could read within the time?
So I think people say that for every hour in class, it's 3 hours reading. This is an hour. This is 80 minutes, but say it's an hour and a half. So it's 4.5 hours reading for each class. That's on average. It's more at the beginning. I'm telling you right now. It's not 3 hours for next class. I don't know how long it takes you to read 4 books, but note that books 5 to 12 are not 4 books. They're more. You'll have the weekend then to read it. So you need to get cracking on it. And as I say, at first you may think, I'm not going to like this because I don't love reading, but you will like this, I think. I would wager, and I don't bet, but still. Yes?
Matt, a few questions. Before your class, I read the first book, 15 pages, half an hour.
Okay. Again, that varies from person to person. But, and you'll struggle with it a bit. I want you to read it before I lecture on it. After I've lectured on it, you may be able to go back and pick up some, because some of it's going to fly over your heads a bit. And you think, well, what's he doing here? He's appealing to the muse and what's going on here? The lectures will fill in that material. But read it before the lecture, because you will get behind. And once again, like I said right at the beginning, do not get behind. It's a terrible feeling. If you get behind, you get behind. You do what you can, but try and stay ahead if you can. Is there a question? Yes?
Yeah, the last 3 works, are those all in the poetry collection?
Yes. So these, Dunn and Herbert, will be in this Metaphysical Poetry and Anthology. It's pretty good, and it's Dover. It's really relatively inexpensive. I mean, you can use a different anthology, like a better one, if you want. This is a cheap one, but they'll be in there. They're both Christian poets, by the way. Yes?
Similar to that, for Sir Gawain in the Green Knight, you recommend a book written by Tolkien? Does it have to be by Tolkien, or the best one?
Well, I like that one because there's Pearl and Sir Orfeo in it. So it's not even a part of it, but read Pearl afterwards. It's so good. It's so good. It's about a father who loses his daughter. His Pearl. It's touching. It's magnificent. No, you could read another one.
Okay.
Sure, especially if you have one. I recommend what I recommend, and there are reasons for it, but I don't want to, if you already own a book, to have to buy another one if if your budget is an issue for you, absolutely, that's fine. Yes?
Are the essays due like 11:59, or are they due like before class?
In class.
Oh, in class, okay.
You'll lay down the burnt offerings on the altar. And it avoids all sorts of problems of losing essays and, this sort of, hand it to me in person, ideally, yeah.
Okay, so it's not on Moodle, it's like a physical printed.
It's a physical printed copy, and the reason I do that as well is that so people don't skip my class because they're writing their essays that day, and we'll hand it at 11:59 to get it under the wire like you Pharisees tend to do. Oh, it's still the day. That's my daughter. I didn't say this. I meant this. Like, well, technically, I'm speaking the right. Okay. We all do that. I don't want you to skip the class. So, yes?
What's the attendance password?
Oh, gosh, yeah. The attendance password is come to class. I don't do the attendance. I can't stand it. It sets entirely the wrong tone. It seems to me at odds with the university. I recognize that for purposes of OSAP and stuff like that might be an issue. We'll make sure that it's taken care of. I have a rough sense of who's here and who isn't. I would say make sure that you come. But the actual idea of filling in data and having, I just think it's, at least you don't swipe card like you used to. You used to have a swipe card when you come in. It's just like, take a number. Don't like it. And if I remember, that's fine, but in general, I don't want to be interrupted by what's this. And panic, I got to make sure that I'm there. Yes, sir.
How do we spell it or phrase it?
I beg your pardon, sorry?
How do we spell it or phrase the password on
To spell it? Sorry.
yeah, is it just like come to class, no space?
I'm missing something.
When he said come to class, he meant physically.
Oh, yeah, I was joking. Sorry. Yeah, no. Oh, my goodness. No, fair enough. Oh.
I was actually spelling it out.
That's fantastic. Okay, good. That is classic. That's so good. So part of being, here's my logic on that. It's not just I don't like the process. I want you to want to be here. I feel like if I compel you to be here, there's some sort of thing. I can have your physical presence and your spiritual absence. I want you to want to be here. And to find that coercion in it actually gets a negative effect. I want you to develop good virtues. And you get that by voluntarily submitting to be here. I don't want you to feel like, oh, no. Like, I'm an educator. I want the right outcome for the right reason, and this seems to me the right way to get it. That's all. You're adults. Yes?
Unfortunately, like, just from a first year perspective, does that mean that if we do not enter the password today, like, will that be
Death.
It'll be death.
I will count everyone present.
Okay.
That's what's going to happen. Everyone who's present will be present. If you were absent for some reason and want to let me know that you were absent from the class, I will be happy to record it for you. Otherwise, I'll consider that you're present. Okay? Yes?
So does that mean class participation is actually class participation?
Yes. I would like you to be attentive and to ask questions. By the way, it's probably obvious from the way you acted. You just put up your hands and asked me questions. Love it. Interrupt me. I mean, not literally shouting, but put a hand up. If I'm in the middle of saying something and you don't understand, put a hand up. It's good. It's part of the classroom experience. Interrupt me. Because I might have said something was unclear, or hold on, you said something, this triggered a thought, and can you say something about this issue? Because you were going to move on to the next thing. Okay, I'll do that. Please do. Yeah. You can see what class attendance can be a bureaucratic thing, or it can be, we're a community, a collegium here, and we're here to develop together so that we are better people. You can't make people better by coercion. You can measure their attendance. Okay, check the box. But that's not what I want from you, right? I mean, I want your attendance, obviously. If it comes down to it and nobody showed up, I mean, I guess I then have to start, oh my goodness, okay, well then I have to act like everybody's two. But we don't want to do that. Anything else? Any other questions? There'll be lots to come, but for now, no? No. Okay. I'll say more about, like all things like essays, you're going to have lots of questions about the essays when it comes closer. I'll say more about it, but I mean, this is just an intro. Okay? Normally the class will take the entire time to the last minute. I'm jealous about using all of my available class time, but today you get to go early because it's first week, so go, yeah, clap, yeah. And I'll see you next time. Take care.